Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I apologize for running a little bit late here. We were having some technical difficulties. So I'll call the meeting to order for the Business Functions Committee meeting. We have three agenda topics for this evening, which is a quick update for any changes that have happened to this current year's proposed budget that the board will be voting on later this month, and then a presentation by Ann. They may be a little bit mixed, but a presentation by Ann about some numbers looking forward into next year, as well as the use of federal funds. And then the last topic that we'll take, and we'll go up until 7:30 with this, is any type of reflection or reaction to how this year has gone for the committee and also for the budget process, so that as we start planning about next year's budget and the process for developing that budget and communicating with the community is going to be informed by both our successes and some of the areas where we need to grow a little bit. So Ann, do you want to go ahead and start off?
Okay, I'll share my screen. Joe, am I able to share my screen? Okay, never mind. Can everyone see the screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, what I tried to do was to give a little bit of information about the state budget, about our budget or the impact of the state budget on our budget, the federal funding, and some summary review of changes in revenue and expense. So I'll get started. I do plan on a presentation at the workshop meeting on the 16th, and there may be a little more detail in that, but I'll share what I have. The Independent Fiscal Office has prepared an update to the state's revenue, and that can be found on their website. Google Independent Fiscal Office or ifo.com, and their recent report is there. But I'm just going to share a couple slides. Some of the major economic indicators. Obviously, what's in the red there for 2020 shows the impact of the COVID and the closure that had on real gross domestic product, wages and salaries, jobs. Now, obviously, the Independent Fiscal Office, like anyone who's responsible for projections, has to make assumptions. And I just wanted to note that they are assuming a relatively quick recovery from the significant contraction imposed on the state economy in the second quarter of 2020. For quarters 3 and 4, they're assuming the state recovery ramps up and coincides with business reopenings. And then in calendar year 2021, partial recovery is largely achieved. Growth reverts to rates closer to non-recessionary historical averages. Their assumptions about the rebound are more optimistic than national forecasts. But again, these are forecasts, and I guess we're just going to have to wait and see what happens. But according to their projections, there will be a rebound during 2021. What's interesting to note about this table, the bottom shows the growth rates during the Great Recession. The difference between these two time periods is that their forecast for the COVID-19 has a sharp employment contraction, you can see, but is followed immediately by jobs growth as businesses reopen and ramp up operations. The next slide really takes a look at wages and employment growth, and it shows the different quarters compared to the same quarter the prior year, and the impact on wages and salaries, all the way through first quarter of 2021. It does show payroll jobs, slowly, rebounding, but overall, with employment levels will still be 165,000 jobs lower than first quarter of 2020. So moving on to the state budget, it has been passed, very good for K-12 education, and we're the only area that received 12 months of funding, and there's no supplanting of state funding, meaning they did not use federal funds to fill basic ed and special ed, which is what happened back in after the 2008-2009 Great Recession. Most of the other education items are funded for only 5 months, and the remainder of those parts of the budget, the state budget, will be negotiated after the November election, after there's hopefully there will be a better sense of state revenue, and could be a second round of federal funding. Basic ed and special ed will be the same amount as 1920 for all districts, and there's no formula adjustment. Exeter, 8.975 million for basic ed, special ed 2.197 million. What I'm reflecting in the final budget is 161,925 less than the May proposed final budget. To recall, I was using what the governor had proposed. 670 plus million in federal funding is being allocated to LEAs. Social Security is level funded, but it may be adjusted up. Teasers reimbursement will increase, obviously, for 2021. Ready to Learn block grant is level funded for 2021. This is a summary page of the state budget, and as you can see, the basic ed, Ready to Learn, anything related to K through 12 really is a 12-month budget. So for federal funding, there are two components. One is the CARES Act ESSER funding, and that's allocated based on Title I-A, and there are a number of uses, but the focus really has to do with addressing the impact of this pandemic and the impact on education, and returning whatever fashion to school in the fall, and how we need to put in plans for protecting students as well as staff. So just to name a few: professional development, so staff understand sanitation, how to minimize the disease, how to provide meals, technology, if there is some form of online learning, purchasing educational hardware, software. The second component is the Disaster Emergency School Health and Safety Grant. This becomes the PCCD grant for 2021. It's a base allocation of 120,000 to each district, plus an additional prorated share based on, I didn't finish my sentence, on ADMs or enrollment. And again, the focus of these funds is really, the cleaning and sanitizing, again, professional development, PPE, thermometers. So really, it's important to note that these are one-time emergency funds, and Exeter's plan for the use of these funds. This is a broad summary, but this is what's being incorporated into the 2021 And then residual amount in the 21-22 budget, the ESSER grant, $355,000, the safety and security grant, $384,000, for a total of $739,000. What's being included in 2021 is $629,000. Really, we've broken out the major functional areas that at this time budget funds are being allocated to. For example, PP&E, cleaning supplies, furniture, anything for social distancing, which, it's for facilities, it's for nurse services, as well as student support. Educational technology, investment of funds for Chromebooks, hotspots, to facilitate distance learning. Contracted professional services for social workers, nurses, psychologists, as needed to meet mental and physical health needs. And then in 21-22, a balance of contracted professional services for the mental health of $110,000. Educational software, this is programs to provide instruction and assessment in virtual, traditional, or hybrid environments. Textbooks, to provide resources to focus on literacy, to compensate for any lost instructional time due to COVID-19 and school closures. And again, instructional supplies, additional manipulatives and supplies to limit the sharing among students. The next slide is a summary of general fund revenue on May 19th, the proposed final budget with the 1.5% property tax increase, $75.8 million. The changes that have occurred, I summarized basic ed and special ed. They're flat funded, so reduce those amounts by $162,000. Adding in the Federal CARES Act funding, $629,000. And then adjustment to the capital lease financing, reduction of $52,000, and that really reflects the exact amount of the cost of the equipment and vehicles that we're using. So for June, the final general fund budget before property tax increase, $75.54 million. And with the 1.5% property tax increase, $76.228 million. 1.5% increase generates approximately $688,000 in additional revenue. At a very summary level, looking at the current year estimate to next year, what are the variances? Local revenue, $1.7 million reduction, and that's before the 1.5% tax increase. And again, we've reviewed this before. It's the decline in local sources of revenue due to COVID-19. State sources increasing due primarily to increase in retirement and debt service reimbursement from the state. The federal, again, that's all related to the CARES Act federal funding being allocated to school districts. Other sources has to do with financing of Chromebooks, and this year for 2020, 2021 is the first time we're financing our transportation vehicles. Looking at expense, the proposed final budget reflected $78,997,263, which included adding back the wage amount related to reading aids at Awatin and Rafton. Changes since that time, health trust premium is going to remain flat, so 0% increase for 2021. And that is a reduction of about $157,000. Equipment and supplies, another additional reductions $64,000. Part of that's due to the pricing obtained for Chromebooks, the better pricing. So that adjustment was made. Capital lease financing, just as we made an adjustment on the financing on the revenue side, we do it on the expense side as well. A little different because some of the adjustments were made prior. Unemployment or per diem subs, we do have some exposure here. I'm adding in 10,000. We currently budget around 10,000 for unemployment, so it's increasing it to 20,000. I mean, our exposure might be more than that, but just anticipating that per diem subs will go back to work. There won't be the full exposure. Contracted transportation, I reduced it because we changed our alternative ed placement to Bucksmont Academy, and we'll do transportation in-house, whereas River Rock required that they transport. Today I received the insurance renewals, premiums, and I'm adding in 15,000 because some of those premiums are going up, and I'll show you that in a second. So the net change since May is a reduction of 245,000 in expense, but we do add in the ESSER and safety expenditures by the same amount that we increased revenue. So the final budget change, 383,814, or final general fund expense, $79,381,077. Here again, just trying to give you a quick summary comparing the 1920 estimate to final budget. And one of the columns in green, I'm comparing the estimate for 1920 before COVID, because as you recall, because of the school closure, expenses are estimated to be about 1.1 million less than the estimate that I provided back in March. But it makes a little more sense to try and compare full year to a full year, because we're budgeting like a full year for 2021. So looking at that, in the green columns, wages 1 million or 3.1% increase, and that's the contract wage increase assumptions that we've made. There is an ESL teacher in the budget, a new ESL teacher, and one special ed. Again, this reflects the budget reductions we've made, as well as retirement impacts. Employee benefits is primarily Social Security and retirement increases. Again, the healthcare premium is flat. The professional services, object 300, 542,000. That's a significant increase, but 134,000 of that is related to the use of federal funds for psychologists, mental health, social work related. The other areas really are special ed driven. Repairs, other purchase services are minimal, they're going down. Supplies and books, it's showing a net increase of 96,000. And again, it's really due to the federal safety and grant supplies. And what's included in this object of 600 supplies is 445,000 of ESSER funds. So overall, this area of expense has gone down for 2021, if you exclude the ESSER or the federal funds. Property, again, that is going down, and in large part due to a deferral of equipment replacement of labs, interactive whiteboards. The dues and claims and the principal payments are based on bond payment schedule, and which reflects the refinancing which was closed, actually closes tomorrow. So overall, 1.652 million or 2.1% increase. Again, if I would compare to the COVID estimate, the variance is would add on 1.1 million. We have our financing in place. It'll be put on the agenda for the workshop. For the Chromebooks, Fulton was the most favorable rate, and for the vehicles, municipal finance. So that will be added to the agenda for the 16th. The insurance premium renewal, again, it's we are seeing a significant increase in workers' compensation. Proposal is to go with a different vendor, AmTrust. We are currently with Encova, but the proposal from Encova was over $264,000, and we work with Loomis, and we believe there's opportunities with AmTrust to improve our panel of doctors, trying to get people back to work sooner. Other proposals we received for workers' comp, somewhere over $300,000. So this right now is the most favorable. There are increase in the property, the top line there, and that has to do with the assessment of our property increase of about $10 million, and that really has to do with, building materials and as well as soft costs, and we're seeing that across the board for all school districts. So that's why we are increasing insurance premium in the budget. So summary of revenue, expense, and fund balance. The columns to the right reflect where we are for June 23rd. Our right column, 1.5% millage increase, deficit of $3,152,000, and it's pretty similar to what we were looking at in May, about $30,000 less, but that is the position that we are in at this point. Again, on the agenda will be fund balance commitments, and the board takes formal action on this. And for 2021, $1,824,821, and the components are teasers. We use some of that every year as the rates go up, so that'll be $470,000. Assessment appeals, $85,000, and capital improvements, $1,269,000. Property tax relief allocation will also have to be approved by the school board, and fiscal code bill authorized using federal funds so that fund was whole and that school districts could receive their full allocation. Our relief amount for 2021 is $1,361,000. There are 6,807 homestead farmstead properties. The assessment reduction will be $5,952. The relief amount at the projected millage of 33.6073 is about $200. So that was good news that we were made whole through the use of federal funds. The other item I think we need to spend some time discussing tonight or at the workshop, House Bill 2460. We've been waiting for movement on this, and it extends the discount period by 30 days and extends the face value period. I really don't know, and none of us have gotten any answers on whether this will move. There is Senate Bill 1125, which allows the extension of the discount period and elimination of penalty. It doesn't dictate what you have to do, but it just allows it. So if legislation is not enacted, does the school board want to consider extending the flat period by 1 month to November 30th? And then the penalty would only be 1 month, which would be December. Not a lot of collections in October and November, 2.7 million out of about 45 million, but again, it could be some relief to some taxpayers who do pay during that time period. So fall budget considerations, the scope of the consequences due to COVID-19 are still uncertain. We're going to have to track our local revenues very closely. We'll also have to track charter school enrollment. Will we see an uptick in that related to how people feel about students returning? There were no legislative changes in charter school funding, so the 2021 tuition rates will be based on current legislation, which prior 1920 budget. We'll have to keep a watch on assessment appeals and also the trend in PISA's employer contribution rate. I would like to mention that the Act 1 index for 21-22 will be based on data from 2017 through 19, so it will not reflect any of the declining payroll information due to COVID-19. So we'll be seeing a similar Act 1 index that we saw this year.
Well, just to give some quick reaction and a follow-up question, then I'll ask other folks to join in. I think it's really notable that aside from the funds that we're spending in order to respond to the coronavirus in the schools this upcoming year, this budget actually reflects spending that is less than our previous budget. And I think that's really notable. It's been a very painful process, but in my opinion, and I know there are some disagreements with this, but I feel like the administration handled it in a deft way. There's definitely a lot of growth opportunities in that process, but I think you guys are really to be commended for the effort and also being able to work with the board and getting to that point. The other thing that I just wanted to say thank you to Ann about is, I think we probably are posed to save what would have otherwise been more spending than we wanted to with renewal of our insurance carrier, with using now AmTrust for the workers' compensation insurance. And I just went through that recently myself at work, and I can, that's not the most energizing of pursuits, but there is money to be saved there, and I think you should readily be commended for that effort. One thing that I just wanted to hone in on, Ann, and it wasn't in your presentation, but would you be able to speak to it all, what you're seeing with our earned income tax revenue for the last 2 months and how you expect that to play out as we move forward? Have any of your forecasts changed at this point?
No, they haven't at this point. We just did receive May, and it is 100,000 less than prior year, but that was expected because of the delay and when they're due. But for next week, I'll provide more detail on the specific local sources of revenue that we will be looking at very closely. Okay. But I think we're on track with what we originally estimated, but can provide that in the workshop meeting.
Okay. Well, other than that, I think that there's a lot of uncertainty. Like Ann said, that we're going to have to continue to watch as we go forward in this next year. And, I think we're just going to have to keep our eyes peeled for it. Is there anybody else who wants to add anything to this part of the discussion?
And I was just wondering, this is Dave Hemberger, just wondering whether you could kind of reiterate the difference between our total expenditures and revenue, just to kind of maybe put a little bit of emphasis on how underfunded we may be for this particular this budget.
Are you, I'm not exactly sure which area you want me to focus on, but
Just
even with
total costs versus total expenditures. I was just wondering if you could just reiterate the difference in our expenses versus revenue.
The total revenue for 2021 before any millage increase is 75.5 million. The expenditures, 79.4 million. So we're really looking at a deficit, excess of spending over revenue of 3.8 million.
But that's before the proposed 1.5%.
Correct.
increase. So what would, if we incorporate the 1.5% into that, my understanding is we're still passing a deficit budget, and I just wondered what that deficit, how much of that remains.
The additional revenue from a 1.5% millage increase would be about 680,000, and then that would leave us with a deficit of 3,152,000. And that is a use of fund balance.
Okay, and that takes our fund balance down to what, 5.6%, which is, I mean, we typically run around 8%.
Typically, the budgets that have been developed and approved, we would be in a position where the unassigned fund balance would be close to 8%. This budget reflects an unassigned fund balance of 5.6%.
Yeah. And so, I guess my concern is that, getting through this year and recognizing we have some challenges ahead in the future, how it seems to me like this is about, 5.6% is getting fairly close to as low as we want to get in terms of dipping into fund balance without overuse of those revenues, those protective revenues. I know that there are some districts who are really in precarious situations right now because they have very little or no fund balance, and this is part of the reason why fund balances are so essential for these totally unexpected situations where districts could find themselves in situations where they have no choice but to take dramatic measures to be able to cover their expenses. I'm just wondering, if we project ahead for next year, and if we were to go through a similar process, and let's just assume we have a modest increase next year as well, and just take the same figure of 1.5%. Any sense of how low our fund balance would go based on what projections are for next year? How close are we getting to a point where we may be really depleting those funds? I know that's probably more of a, kind of a guesstimate or theoretical, kind of a question, but I'm just want to have if you have any sense at all of how this is going to impact us in the future.
I have shown long range or 5-year projections back in March, April, and if with modest, very modest increase of 1.5%, and assuming that our wages and benefits, which is obviously the lion's share of the expense budget, giving increases, 2.5%, 3%, and with state funding not stepping up to the plate, by 22, 23, or the year after, we really could consume a large part of the fund balance or the savings. So,
Yeah.
and I think I've also illustrated, raising to the index. And again, we don't know what that's going to be after 21, 22, when these COVID years are put into the mix. We would continue to use fund balance, assuming, based on my assumptions, but getting to a position where that deficit is not as great. You have to understand that, wage and benefit increases, total 2 million or more per year. So, and everything else remaining relatively flat, that's what you have to keep up with. And if we're at a $3 million deficit, obviously each year you can increase it by 2 million. If you're not raising taxes to support these increases, or making other types of changes, or not getting the state funding that you need.
Yeah. So I mean, this pattern that we're in right now. I mean, this is and the analysis you did, I remember, was pre-COVID. So I mean, I think it's probably just accelerated as a result of the effects of the economic impact of the pandemic. But the pattern that we've developed right now is not sustainable, and so over a period of time we will run out of our fund balance, and we will put ourselves in pretty significant financial jeopardy unless something shifts. And as you mentioned, sounds like one is that we would have to make some fairly serious adjustments in our school operations, or number two, we would have to see a state legislature that's willing to kind of step up and recognize that all school districts are facing these same shortfalls. Particularly if wages want to keep up with the general trends in the country, and we want to and need to remain competitive in order to attract staff and maintain staff. So I mean, it's an overall structure to me that is kind of destined for some difficulties in the future, and we're kicking the can down the road a little bit. I mean, I know and I appreciate the fact that we're looking at an increase this year, but I think, to be honest, if we really wanted to address the structural problems that we're having, that's not going to be sufficient moving forward in future years to be able to kind of keep us afloat. So just my analysis of your data, and I think I haven't said anything that you haven't already said before, Anne, but I just felt it was worth reiterating.
Thank you.
And where does Exeter stand in relation to the other 17 districts in terms of, Dave referred to the districts that are in dire straits with their fund balance. Where are we in that ranking or listing of districts in the best shape in terms of fund balance and districts in the worst shape in terms of fund balance?
I would have to go back and try to find that information. I don't know that at the top of my head.
Okay, could you have that for the workshop?
Are you talking statewide?
No, just for Berks County.
Okay.
Could John, would you mind if we narrowed that to comparable districts like Muhlenberg, Governor Mifflin, Daniel Boone? Because I think it's going to take a lot of time for Ann to try and work those up, and I think those might be some pretty good comparisons to look at those because they're very similar in size, I think, to our population, our student population.
Yeah, I just thought we could, I mean, I could help. I thought maybe we could just call every district and say, what's your fund balance, and get the percentages and the numbers. But if it's more to it than that, then sure, I guess.
Yeah, and I'm not sure, John, too. I mean, the other thing too is that, I mean, districts are still in the process of making decisions in terms of their final budget. So I'm not so sure whether at this point they have an absolute clarity in terms of what the impact is going to be on their fund balance. I have seen in the paper, some districts have come through with their final or near final projected. I don't know if any district has at this point right now passed a final budget yet, but it's that final budget that I think will be the most critical part of that, because that'll ultimately then the numbers will just roll out from there.
And John, maybe you and I can huddle on this too, because I can show you where you can find the audits or the state reports that each of the districts. I think it's I think on your annual budget, which I think is PDE 2028, every district has to post them on their website, I think, if they have a website. So we can, if you want, we can huddle and I can show you how to find them. And I can even do some of the work myself too and help you out with that. But if that information is available publicly, maybe we can just come with that ourselves.
I just thought it might be helpful, not just for the ranking's sake, but to help us make some decisions before we vote on the 26th is our meeting. But if that's not possible, then that's fine. It's not possible.
Well, I think it is possible. I just know that Ann has a lot that she's working on right now. And I'm wondering, can we just do that ourselves?
Sure. Yeah. I said a few minutes ago, I said, I'm willing to jump in and help. Yes.
Okay. Rock on. Well, how about you and I, can you call me tomorrow at some point in the afternoon and we'll huddle on that and figure out how to put that together best?
Sure.
Okay. Sweet.
I would like to just point out that the PD 2028 is primarily focused on the general fund, and there may be one sheet in that report which looks at other funds and their balances. So just keep in mind that other school districts may have larger capital project funds sitting out there. So
what is their state report for the full audit called? That's different than PD 2028.
It's 2057.
Okay, yeah, and those ones are all supposed to be on their websites as well, right?
Correct.
Okay, 2057.
And then we're looking at the unassigned fund balance, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And then we can put that
try and-
Excel sheet together and send it out to all the board members. And did I cut you off before you were going to say something? I'm sorry.
No, I'm good.
Okay. Does anybody else want to add anything at this point?
Hunter, did you see the question that we had come in? Send it to you in chat.
Okay. Okay. It appears as if the food service program. Okay. And on a previous document for the end of this school year, we were showing that we would have about a $1.7 million deficit in our food service program. And I think this question is from Joe Happ, and he wants to know, I think, basically why that isn't self-sustaining. The food service program isn't self-sustaining.
The food service is the proprietary fund, and it has to reflect the other post-employment benefits, you know, both GASB 68 and I believe 75. So that obligation is what makes that net asset amount go into the negative. And I think I've went over this in previous meetings. You know, they actually do have a positive cash balance, but it's just the presentation of their net asset. And on Tuesday at the workshop, I will adjust that number to pull out the other post-employment impact. That it's kind of, you know, a theoretical and accounting type adjustment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So the effect is that in the operations we have a surplus.
Well, a positive fund balance, if you want to call it that. But we were, for the budget for 2021, we are budgeting, you know, to be better than break even a little more. This year we budgeted that way as well for 1920, but due to the closure and having to pay no more, no less, and, you know, feeding students through the end of June, the last projection was a loss of about $90-some thousand. But again, I will update that on the 16th.
Okay. All right. Is there any more in there? Okay. All right. We want with this as much as we want, but I kind of just wanted to have some conversation in retrospect about how we've done as a committee, what you guys thought worked well, what didn't. And, you know, that's really going to be used to inform, I think, another goals, a budget goals document for next year that I'll be developing as a draft for the committee and then the entire board, hopefully this time to consider with Dr. Miner and Ann as we get into next year. So, you know, I'll leave it at
Who did you ask a question of? I can't hear you.
just anybody who wants to jump in. I can volunteer people if necessary, but I was going to wait a full minute to let other people do so on their own initiative.
Hunter, could you?
Yeah. So the question I'm really asking is for how the committee worked this year. What worked well, or maybe I'll expand that to the entire budget process. What worked well, and what can we improve upon for next year?
Okay, I'll throw out, you know, my 2 cents. You know, I think this was probably, from my perspective, one of our most aggressive stabs at really doing significant analysis and discussion on this budget. And it started early, which I thought was really important, you know. And it not only, I think, yielded as a result, you know, pretty decent areas where we identified, you know, savings in, you know, in areas that we have control over, which aren't that many. You know, but it also kind of established a sort of an expectation and a, you know, sort of a process for full engagement. I mean, everybody, every budget manager, every administrator, anyone who had control over costs was challenged to examine their expenses and do everything they could to identify areas for savings. Some were able to identify more than others. But I mean, it also, I think it also sent a message that, we have to do everything we possibly can every year, and not just this year. I don't think it's an anomaly, but every year to recognize this is one of our most important functions, certainly now, considering the fact that, so much is asked of our local taxpayers in terms of funding public education. So little is being done at the state level to fund public education now, at least in terms of the increases that we always see. So I was very happy with the process. I mean, I'm not sure whether we got to the point where we have to get in terms of impact upon, some of the structure within our programs, where we get into actual, the impact of staffing with program change. But I mean, I think it really helped us. It helped guide us, and it helped us identify areas where we had at least some control over the things that we knew were within our grasp to control. So I mean, I had a favorable sense about it. I think we all learned a lot too in the process, and by going through that, we also we acquire more insights into how budgets are constructed and some of the components of how it's put together. I think Ann's done a great job of kind of tutoring us, so to speak, educating us. I think we're all a little stronger and all a little bit better able to articulate different aspects of the budget and how it's put together. It's kind of learning by doing. And so we were engaged. I thought, the effort to draw in the community was good, except, I'm not sure whether we got a full representation of the community, when we had those meetings. The meetings seemed to be heavily weighted in the area of either staff or folks who had, sort of a personalized interest in a particular aspect of our district programs. So when we were asking folks to take a look at things that could be reduced or eliminated, it was very difficult because the folks who came out were really advocates to hold on to that. So I'm not so sure whether that was the best model for identifying areas for change, but I thought it was a good effort on our part, and for those that participated, I thought it was eye-opening to kind of see, what our expenses were in each of the categories and areas that we had debate on and discussion on. And board members were all engaged. We sat at tables with, with members of the community and staff. And, I thought it was a way that we really showed that we were digging into it. So I thought that was a really excellent exercise on our part. And I hope that we continue that in the future, but, find more opportunities to bring in people who are not necessarily, directly engaged in the educational process. Only maybe a quarter of our population in our district has kids who go to school. And I don't think too many of those people were represented at the table when we had those conversations. I mean, the other 75% who don't have kids, in our schools. So, but overall, I had a very favorable sense of how it operated this year, and I appreciate all the work that was done by the board and the administrators, especially, and our community members who came out.
Hunter, two things come to mind for me. One is to kind of build on what Dave was talking about with regard to the community budget meetings. I think in terms of next year and in terms of, maximizing the input we get, I think when we have, meetings, whether we do something community-wide again, or whether it's just these business functions committee meetings, I think if there's one positive, if you will, that we've learned from, being on the pandemic. It's that the benefit of being able to stream things, make things live so that people can participate without physically being there. And so I think in terms of the input mechanism, we have some real opportunity next year to really be creative in trying to maximize, all the input from as many different stakeholders as we can. I think, we had a lot of tough conversations this year, and I think we really did a nice job of, administrators, board members listening to each other, everybody articulating their different concerns. I think it is going to be important as we head into next year, kind of looking at that, that term that I'll call right sizing when we look at Exeter collectively as a district, and how we may want, to right size it, making sure that, we're being willing to look openly at every aspect of the district. I think, I kind of reflect on the past 2 years, and, 2 years ago, music kind of felt like we were targeting music. And, this year the aides kind of felt like they were being targeted. And I think, moving forward, we need to figure out, as we're looking at all the different things we want to explore in the budget, that it's really a, overall, we're looking at the district as a whole. This is not targeting one particular group or one particular area or one particular extracurricular.
Are there any other board members on who want to chime in? John, I think you're muted.
I think we can do a better job of, I asked this at my table whenever the opportunity presented itself, was to ask people to share our pain and give us ideas on what we could cut. And I guess the thing that I learned was that people don't want to cut anything. And I don't think we're going to make it through this year, next year, and the years to come unless we make some serious cuts. I read in the paper about Wilson taking some pretty strong action in cutting positions. I don't like the idea of that, but we really don't have any more tricks in our bag of tricks. I think it's a fool's errand to look for the state for help. I don't think we're going to see that in my lifetime. Maybe not even in your lifetime, Hunter. As long as the Republicans are in charge.
Oh, you torpedoed my ship there.
And so I just think we have to enlist the help of the community and ask them very specific questions. And this would be all part of the preparation to ask the right questions, I guess is the if I learn one thing over the course of my career, it's how to ask good questions. But I didn't always have the answers to what is the best question. So maybe we can do more preparation work to ask, so that we can ask the public the right questions in the right way and get them to tell us, how do we fix these budget deficits? How do we keep from tapping into our fund balance? So that would be my only comment, to say that it behooves us to do a better job with that next year, whether we do 1 meeting, 6 meetings, maybe 2 virtual meetings, 1 in-person meeting. I think the pandemic has showed that people do sign in via Zoom. I think Joe told us during one recent meeting that there were close to 200 people listening in. That's terrific. Maybe that's the way to go, but I think more importantly, we need to come up with the right questions so that we can ask the people who show up, whether online or in person, tell us what we can cut. Tell us what you could live without. what you and your student at home could live without? Because I think those are the questions we're going to have to find answers to if we're going to get through this year and the next upcoming years.
Okay. If there isn't anybody else who wants to add anything, I think we can call it there. That'll be an ongoing conversation, and there'll be more reported back once I'm able to have some more conversations with Dr. Miner and Mrs. Guidish and Patrick. And I think we'll be able to gain some clarity about how to do better this next year, both in engaging, I think, the board and helping build that understanding up from where we are using those questions that I think, John, you were referring to a little bit, but also figuring out ways to improve our outreach to the community and really be able to build some more buy-in there. Okay. Without further ado, we'll call it there. Thank you for tuning in, and I believe that there will be a facilities committee meeting on Thursday night, or Thursday in the afternoon, I think. Is that right, John?
Right, Thursday at 1 o'clock. And just by way of apology and explanation, I didn't realize this meeting was being held. I saw the invitation, but frankly didn't pay any attention to the date. Aren't these meetings usually held before a board meeting?
Normally, yes. The reason that this one was held beforehand was I think that we had some scheduling challenges on the 26th when we had moved the meeting to. I can't recall exactly what there was before the meeting, but part of the reason is that we wanted to make sure that we were able to address some of the questions that might come up about the budget beforehand. And that's kind of changed a little bit since the meeting was moved. And did you want to add anything more to that?
The reason that it was moved to this evening was really basically if there were any, like you said, questions or suggested changes, we wanted ample time to address it before we actually vote on the 23rd, before the board votes on the 23rd.
I think just a trick I used to use in setting up meetings is that if something is falling out of the usual order of things, maybe to put something in the subject line or at the top of the email in all caps, please note change in meeting date. Because I mean, it's my fault that I missed it, and I apologize for signing on late, and I apologize for all my blackout time, but I actually had dinner on the stove and in the stove, and it was at a point where I couldn't just turn everything off. So that's why I had to be away for most of it. And again, that's on me. But just if we could all remember, if we're doing a meeting that is going to meet at a different time than people are normally expecting it to occur, maybe we could just put some sort of announcement right at the top and say, please note. And
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in this evening. We appreciate the involvement that you have, and we look forward to seeing you in the future.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.
okay, good night.
Night.